John Ruskin was born to a wealthy merchant family in London in 1819. He was an art critic, an artist, a writer, and a philosopher. He published extensively during his lifetime and was quite an influential figure, helping to inspire, among other things, the arts and craft movement. And seeing as this movement is one of our focuses this week, I will be introducing some of Ruskin's work that was known to have influenced it. In 1892, William Morris printed an edition of Ruskin's The Nature of Gothic, a chapter from the second volume of Ruskin's The Stones of Venice, originally published in 1853. Morris added his own introduction to this edition, in which he writes the following. Indeed, from the time of which he wrote this chapter here reprinted, those ethical and political considerations have never been absent from his criticism of art, and in my opinion, it is just this part of his work, fairly begun in the nature of Gothic, and brought to its culmination in the great book Unto This Last, which has had the most enduring and beneficent effect on his contemporaries and will, through them, on succeeding generations. The ethical and political considerations, as mentioned by Morris in both The Nature of Gothic and Unto This Last, come together to provide some of the philosophical structure that the arts and craft movement is formed around. I'll be examining both of these pieces and hopefully elaborating on some of the important aspects of each of them, important at least in how it influences the art and craft movement. The majority of The Nature of Gothic is spent examining and explaining the key features that make up Gothic architecture. This, however, is not what draws our attention to the chapter. Instead, it is the value that the chapter placed on variety. The chapter establishes that Gothic architecture is made better by the freedom that individual builders had on the design and execution. This creative freedom in the creation process allowed them to create architecture that was unique and therefore more interesting. Ruskin wrote, "The great art, whether expressing itself in words, colors, or stones, does not say the same thing over and over again, but that the merits of architecture, as of every other art, consist in its saying new different things, that to repeat itself is no more a characteristic of genius in marble than it is of genius in print, and that we may, without offering any laws of good taste, require of an architect as we do of a novelist, that he should be not only correct, but entertaining. We must no more expect to derive either pleasure or profit from an architecture whose ornaments are of one pattern, of whose pillars are of one proportion, than we should out of a universe in which the clouds are all of one shape, and the trees all of one size." The nature of Gothic, in the theory that it lends to the arts and craft movement, is fairly simple. That we should endeavor to create things that are more interesting, that certain things should be valued as art forms, and they should therefore be performed in a way that acknowledges their value and endeavors to be unique. The second piece of writing that I will be talking about by Ruskin is, as mentioned earlier, Unto This Last. In 1860, John Ruskin published a series of 4 articles in the Cornhill magazine. Ruskin does not write much at all about art or craftsmanship during these articles. What the articles do focus on is Ruskin's idea for a fair wage for labor. Ruskin believed that there should be a set wage for each certain type of labor, dependent on how skilled the labor was. He writes, "The natural and right system respecting all labor is, that it should be paid at a fixed rate, that the good workman employed and the bad workman unemployed. The false, unnatural, and destructive system in when the bad workman is allowed to offer his work at half price and either take the place of the good or force him by his competition to work for an inadequate sum." Ruskin was adamant that people should be paid for their labor in a way that was just, that it is the responsibility of all parties involved in the transaction to be attempting to make as fair of an exchange as possible, essentially paying someone what you honestly think their labor is worth, not the absolute minimum you can convince them to take, that we should be working together for everyone's benefit. A key point in this idea was that it doesn't matter how many people are willing to do a certain job, that job will still have the same set rate, thus attempting to ensure that the job goes to the most skilled laborer. What happens to the others, less skilled laborers, in this hypothetical, you may ask? Ruskin proposes that in this system, it will fall into place that they would end up working for the more skilled laborer. There are many flaws to be found in a lot of what Ruskin is writing about here. Not even just what I have mentioned so far, but a lot that I probably couldn't go into just for the sake of time. At this time, I'm just going over the ideas that he presented in these 2 essays. I will conclude with some of the last ideas that John Ruskin puts into these articles. Ruskin writes about labor as a sort of scale of positive and negative labor, or destructive and creative. Positive, that which produces life; negative, that which produces death. If a form of labor creates, then it is a positive form of labor. It is a labor that produces life. Ruskin writes, "There is no wealth but life, life including all its powers of love, of joy, and of admiration. That country is the richest which nourishes the greatest number of noble and happy human beings. That man is richest who, having perfected the functions of his own life to the utmost, has also the widest helpful influence, both personal and by the means of his possessions, over the lives of others. As the art of life is learned, it will be found at least that all lovely things are also necessary." In this way of thinking, Ruskin is proposing a way of viewing the world as to better benefit society. There is just labor and there is unjust labor. There are just ways of conducting business and unjust ways. There are ways that work towards producing and creating and innovating, and there are ways that are destructive. Ruskin proposes that working in a way that he considers to be just betters the collective wealth that is rich not in money but in happiness. John Ruskin died in 1900. Before that, in 1871, Ruskin founded the St. George Company, a guild with the goal of making England a better, happier place to live, and one more in line with his own values. The focuses of the guild at the time were art education, craftsmanship, and farming. He was trying to create a society away from the industrialized, mass-producing city. Unfortunately, around that time of the formation of this guild, Ruskin suffered from problems with his health, and he never quite achieved his vision and what he thought the guild could be. However, they never disbanded, and although they functioned differently than what Ruskin's original design was, they still exist to this day. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you are doing well.